Welcome to our review of some news articles relating to the death of Prince Philip. So today we're going to start with an article from the Daily Mail, which talks about plans for Philip's funeral and discusses who it might be that attends. Tori, would you like to jump in on this one?
The family at the moment, we're still having to have funerals under COVID restrictions, so there will only be 30 people attending Prince Philip's funeral. Now, I believe he requested to not have a state funeral. He wanted something more in vein of the Queen Mother's funeral about 20 years ago. So it would have been smaller anyway, but still there would have been far more ceremony involved due to his links to the military and all the patronages he had. There would have been hundreds of people expected to take part, many military processions and things, but unfortunately those are unlikely to happen because, as well as the funeral only having 30 people attending, the royal family is obviously keen to avoid drawing any crowds, and I think it's actually extended to them removing floral tributes outside Windsor Castle at the moment as well. So it's going to be kept a lot smaller. Obviously, the royal family is slightly larger than the average family, but it's expected to really probably only extend to children and grandchildren, essentially, plus potentially the Queen's cousin.
Absolutely. No, I think that's very interesting, and I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, particularly around younger members of the family who are able to join. So I think that neatly brings us on to our next article that we wanted to discuss, which was an article by Page Six, focusing on Prince Philip's family, specifically his mother and his sisters. Walt, did you have anything that you wanted to say with regard to this?
Points to this, if I'm on. Prince Philip lived to be almost 100, so we thought he must have had quite an interesting life. And according to this article, his family was pretty crazy. So his father was the most normal of the bunch, it seems, but then his mother had a hard time. So she, born in the 19th century, by the way, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, diagnosed by Sigmund Freud, no less. She had her womb irradiated with X-rays to thwart her sexual desires, and then she was sent to a sanatorium against her will. So that was the mother. He had 4 sisters, 3 of whom married Nazis. So the oldest one married a Nazi. The next one married a Nazi and died in a plane crash in 1937. And at the funeral, family members turned up in Nazi uniforms. The next one married a Nazi and said Hitler was a charming and modest man, but then the 4th one didn't marry a Nazi. So she was the exception. Other thing to add, I always figured that Philip was an Englishman because he just seemed like a posh old Englishman, but actually he is a Greek man born in Greece. So that's family.
Yeah, I don't know whether he ever actually spoke Greek. I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out. But thank you, Walt. That's very interesting little section on that article. And then last but not least, we wanted to discuss an article from South West Londoner to show a lighter side of Prince Philip, which Sarah, would you like to say anything to do with that?
Yeah, well, this story is interesting because it's one of those things that we've always known about Prince Philip. We've always known that the specific island and this tribe worshipped him as a deity. And this is on the island of Tanna. And it's obviously come again to the forefront in his death. And it is one of those lighter stories, and on the weird side, that kind of gets you thinking about, more joyous or strange things during obviously a really sad time. And it's this island. He's had a relationship with them through his life. Once he discovered about them, he sent them autographs and they sent him a pig club. And it was just a really happy kind of thing between it all. And he never actually ended up visiting the island, although Prince Charles and Princess Anne did. But they did have a private meeting with him in England and the UK, where we don't actually know what happened during the under in the classic royal case. I think it's just one of those stories that, like I said, during a tragic time when our whole country and some of the world are in mourning for him, it just brings us back to the lighter side of life and gets us thinking about other things again as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just quite a nice sort of like feel good piece almost, that I don't know. Yeah, that there's this little island in the Pacific that worships Prince Philip like a god. It's sort of quite yeah, it's just quite sort of nice and entertaining. So
yeah. There's a picture of it as well. They think the idea that he's going to come home now, and it'll be interesting to see how the Prince Philip movement there moves on as he's passed.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to keep our eyes peeled and see what happens. But that brings us to the end of our paper review. So thank you very much, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, you can see me, right? Yeah, we're going to do a paper review today. This is going to be me, Declan Carey, and I'm joined by Lee and Stephen. So we're going to talk through some of the big stories from the last day. So the first story that we're going to talk about, it's actually about a South Pacific tribe, and this is in Southwest London. This is a tribe which worships Prince Philip, and they believe that he's now going to return. It's part of a group of 80 islands in the South Pacific, and the Prince Philip movement actually came to light within the 1950s, and it's quite an unusual one, quite different from the rest of the coverage we've seen. So let's see what the guys make of it. Let's start with Lee. What do you think of this story?
Yeah, it was quite an interesting one in the sense of it's very unique. There's some things in there that kind of defy belief a little bit, because it seems as though there's some stats in there or some information in there that you would think would have come to light by now. So it almost seems as though it was a little bit of a crazy story, especially in terms of some of the beliefs that will be shown within it, in terms of Duke of Edinburgh, where he was born, the impact of Barack Obama's presidency and the winning of the presidency. So it was almost kind of like kept you gripped to it, because it seems so kind of far out of away from the ordinary as you can get from a news story. So it definitely kept me engaged.
Yeah, cool. Stephen, I mean, they mentioned that there's a big celebration on this island every year. How important is it for this island, and do you think that, Prince Philip has passed? What's it going to be like for them?
Well, according to the article, it's not marked the end of the movement. The John Frum movement. I've lost myself now.
Yeah, I mean, the tribe believe that he'll return in some sort of like spiritual form, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this different cultures, a culture like this tribe from the South Pacific, how they view death compared to our Western culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
They seem to mourn it, shall we say, a lot more than they do in the South Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, definitely. So that was something different that was compared to the rest of the coverage. And that kind of brings us on nicely to the next story, which is from CNN. So now we're looking at some of the international coverage, obviously from the United States. And this is very much focused on the funeral arrangements of Prince Philip, how the family are going to come back there. So, I mean, Lee, obviously there are some restrictions on funerals in the UK at the moment. What sort of impact's that going to have, you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to have quite a huge impact. I think one of the questions that was initially raised was, what type of funeral would it be? And attention turns to that very, very quickly. And especially with the restrictions that we've currently got in the UK, where, as it stands right now, we've got a maximum of 30 people at a funeral. I think questions were quite rightly raised in terms of, would it be any different for a member of the royal family in a ceremonial situation? So, I think what we picked up from this, first and foremost, Declan, is that they're looking for it to be a very low-key ceremony when it does happen. And I think from what he says within this particular article is that they're going to start the process of putting the plans together today. So it'll be interesting kind of to see what they go for. But I know that with COVID restrictions, they are advising people not to gather in groups and lay, flowers outside Buckingham Palace and places. It did also mention that, there was up to 200,000 people that gathered after the Queen Mother's death. And obviously we can't have a situation anywhere near that with current restrictions in place. So that's kind of where we are, but it's definitely going to have an impact.
It's interesting.
Okay. Sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
This article is interesting where it talks about the wall-to-wall coverage on the BBC, the complaints about the wall-to-wall coverage of Prince Philip, and how the BBC have set up a page where you can complain about all the programmes being cancelled, like EastEnders and MasterChef and all that.
Yeah. All right then, and I think that's all of our time. So yeah, thanks for papers review today. So we've looked at 2 of the big stories. Thanks for joining us, and I was Declan with Stephen and Lee.
Good afternoon and welcome to the South West Londoner 3:30 paper review. Today we're going to be talking about the Prince Philip paper coverage. First, we will be going to our sports correspondent Emma to discuss.
Hey Kat, I'm not sure if there's a noise that everyone can hear, but I think it's gone now. So on South West Londoner, there's an article about major sporting organisations. Oh, I think that we might have some technical problems. I don't know what's going on. Well, I think we're having some technical difficulties. Okay, so I think we're fine. On South West Londoner, they've got an article about major sporting events continuing this weekend. So there's a lot going on in terms of football, rugby. They've got the Masters in Augusta. But what's really nice is that the article says that the sporting events are showing their sort of contribution to the mourning of Philip with a minute's silence. In football, they'll be wearing black armbands. But this is slightly different from when Diana died, because the article states that sports was suspended across the UK, including top football fixtures. But I mean, today we've got the Grand National at Aintree, but they are having a tribute to Philip with a minute's silence. And I think it's quite nice because he was a patron of the Jockey Club. And also you've got the British Olympic Association. They've had a tribute as well. And it says it's a tribute to a man who was both the father and grandfather of Team GB athletes. Zara Phillips' winning team, eventing silver at the London 2020. And obviously Zara and Mike Tyndall have just had a baby as well. So that's a really nice touch in this article. I think that we might be going on to someone else.
No, I'm just going
Hello, right. I'm just the next article that we've got up here is about the Daily Mail, which today released a 144-page spread on Prince Philip's death and life. And it basically is setting a record for the longest print press. So who said print press is dead, you know? Not the Daily Mail, because this is a really big deal that they're hoping a lot of people will maybe get for the novelty value. As you can see here, it's in the printing factory, and there's a picture of him, and it's going to cover many of his life stories and his military career, his relationship with the Queen, everything that everyone wants to know. Quick turnaround with a day, 24 hours to create this 144-page spread. So yeah, catch it today in stores UK-wide, I'm sure. And have a look at the, there's someone printing it today. They must have been working throughout the night to get it on news agents across the country.
I think it's quite a nice touch because it's really traditional, isn't it? And I feel like it's kind of like a collector's item that people can treasure with this sort of special edition.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Daily Mail is obviously sort of famous for its online version, but it's still really putting a lot of funding into the press as well and printing.
I think that also we can talk about what is going on, not just in the UK, but Tash, there's some other bits going on elsewhere.
Yeah, so what's been really interesting to see is that obviously, Philip being part of the royal family and the head of state in the UK, it's a huge deal here. But it's been really interesting to see how in other parts of the world where maybe you wouldn't think Prince Philip's deaths would, be so life-changing, it is for a village community on the island of Tanna, which is a South Pacific island. And the island itself is about the size of Hull, which is really interesting. And this story was actually picked up by both the Times and South West Londoner, and basically the story is that the sort of origins of the cult are not really clear, but for whatever reason, this village community believe that Philip is a god. They've had sort of photo exchanges a couple of times, but he's never actually been to the island, and so they're going to be very upset because, as with his death, he's not going to get to come.
I think it's quite nice, though, the fact that he's never been there, but he won't get to visit at all, but I think it's nice that they kind of like treasure him.
His memory lives on.
Yeah, his memory does live on. But yeah, that's all three of the articles that we've been through. So we went through the Times, South West Londoner, and the Daily Mail. So all three like really different articles across the death of Prince Philip. But yeah, I think that's all from us. So I hope you look forward to the next group, and I hope they don't have any technical difficulties. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, I'm Josie. Someone's mic. Okay. Hi, I'm Josie, and today we're going to be discussing some stuff to do with Prince Philip's death. So just to begin, there was an article in The Critic which focused on his wartime legacy. So I'm wondering, Elaine, if you have any thoughts about the fact that Prince Philip was one of the last remaining veterans of World War II.
Different generations associate him with different things, and certainly older people will think of his wartime legacy a lot more than a lot of younger people would. And actually, he had quite a distinguished service. He served with the Allies on a landing in Italy in which he was later recognized as being quite heroic. A lot of people on board the ship on which he was serving as first lieutenant said that he had actually saved people's lives by conceiving of a decoy that helped distract German aircraft and stop them from bombing their ship. So there's a lot about Prince Philip's wartime legacy that younger generations won't know about, and that it was a career that he had to give up in order to enter the royal family when he married the Queen.
And Marion, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it raises like quite an interesting point about like how the royal family is seen like across different generations. Like I think like, you know, like I didn't even know about this as like a younger person, and I think like it's like quite a useful way to like, you know, get younger generations to like perhaps see sides of the royal family that they wouldn't usually.
And alongside his image as a war veteran, Prince Philip was also known for his fashion and public image. Zainul, do you have any thoughts about Prince Philip's fashion?
Yeah, I think it's like one of the things that we don't consider, because in the last few years of his life, he had waning health. And what people don't realize is in the 1950s and the 60s, he was considered more of a fashion icon, and a humble one at that. And I think this also helped to boost his image in the media as well. Like they would talk about how he was a bit more humble. He wouldn't be flash necessarily when, And
that article was in the New York Times. So does anyone have any thoughts on how American journalism in regards to Prince Philip's death can compare it to UK journalism?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting seeing that difference, looking at that piece in the New York Times. There's lots of things that you can contrast with the way that the British press has reported on his death. That's a piece that talks about how Prince Philip's fashion was actually a sign of him playing it quite safe, and how he used his style as the Queen's consort to kind of support her while not overshadowing her. And the piece is interesting because it goes into that, and it talks about how he played it safe in that respect. But at the same time, in the American publication, they don't shy away from describing, his comments as misogynistic and sexist. And there's a real difference there. You can see the distance that they have, and kind of a willingness to broach those more difficult subjects with those terms that you wouldn't really see in mainstream British media.
Yeah. Bringing things back to today then, South West Londoner did cover that the Grand National was going to go ahead in spite of Prince Philip's death. How do you think that it was important for this event to go on in comparison to the cancellation of other events and BBC shutting down their broadcasting yesterday?
I think it's a good occasion in which to commemorate him as well. The royal family would attend the event like regularly, almost every single year. They're known for breeding horses, for example. They're known for being there. And I think these type of events as well, it's going to make it obvious, and it's going to make it more obvious that the absence of the Prince Philip will will be there. I think it's a good way to pay respect for him to hold a 2-minute silence at the event, and it's going to be broadcast tomorrow on ITV, I believe.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Go on, Eleni.
Well, I was just going to add that it's really interesting seeing events like that go ahead while, you know, other things get cancelled, you know, BBC broadcasting gets cancelled, but, you know, sports events, which some of which are close to what the royal families did, have been able to go ahead with tributes to them.
Yeah, and he was the president of the International Federation for Equestrian Sport, so it's quite fitting that the Grand National would go ahead.
It makes me wonder, you know, it makes me wonder when, you know, in the future, when the Queen dies, what sort of like mourning we will have as like Britain, and what kind of, whether it will be like a similar sort of situation, or whether it will be like, you know, even more things closing and things.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this feels like the next closest thing in that sense. And it's almost it's really an indication of what our reaction is and what it means for a senior royal to die, and how that, you know, how we respond to that is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your comments today, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to Southwest London. I'm Emma Carey. You could not have missed the news yesterday of the tragic passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip. You couldn't have missed the display of stories everywhere, including the 144 pages the Daily Mail have devoted to the passing, or the fact that the BBC have allegedly received news complaints for the amount of stories they've covered. However, from the litany of stories that are out there, it's very difficult to know which are the ones we're focusing on. We have decided, as well as celebrating and remembering the life of the man, of the prince himself, we would like to kind of discuss some of the more logistical issues occurring at these most unprecedented of times whilst the pandemic, COVID-19. I believe Grace can say there.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, we found this article from Wales Online, which talks about the funeral arrangements because they are very confusing to a lot of us. We haven't had a royal funeral since 2002 with the Queen Mother. So even though these funeral plans we know have been in place for decades, COVID has drastically changed these plans. And the funeral was originally meant to be for 800 guests, but it will now just have 30 people attending within COVID rules. So this probably works quite well for the family, and Prince Philip never wanted any fuss and was not keen on having a state funeral. He just wanted a ceremonial one, and that is said to be held next Saturday at St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. So even though state and ceremonial funerals do share many of the same characteristics, the ceremonial ones are typically more private. They're similar in the way they both have the lying in state, a procession with gun carriage and military contingents, but we know that those military aspects will not be happening. No crowds will be lining the street because of COVID. But Lizzie, what else did you read from the article?
Yeah, Grace, I'm glad you brought that up. So obviously, due to the coronavirus restrictions, we are seeing much fewer guests at this funeral than you would typically have at such an important occasion. But as those restrictions begin to open up, we will likely be seeing some more public memorial services, which, again, for those Prince Philip fans out there will know this isn't really what he wanted. He wanted a much more private affair rather than making a bit of a fanfare of his death. So it will be interesting over the next few months to see the way that the prince is remembered going forward. I think we've lost Emma.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts there, Grace and Lizzie. I believe that there's been a bit of controversy concerning who we actually make it to the funeral. Grace Duncan, I believe you've been reading some things in the papers about this.
Yes, obviously the biggest question on guest list is around Prince Harry, who is now in America, living with Meghan. And Southwest Londoner has done an article on this, talking about kind of what the difficulties will be when you're coming into the country due to the coronavirus restrictions. So they will need to quarantine for at least 5 days, whether that's in a hotel or a private residence is up to them. America is not on the red list at the moment, so they do not need to go into the full 2-week quarantine. They will also need to have 2 coronavirus tests to be taken in the UK, including Harry as a British citizen. He needs to still present a negative COVID test taken within 72 hours of arrival. So it is a logistical challenge. And if he's planning on coming over for the funeral, he should be on a plane in the next 24 hours.
Has there been on Meghan?
Yeah, so as the article touches on, there's also an extra logistical challenge when it comes to Meghan, as she is heavily pregnant. There isn't an official due date so far, but she is expected to give birth in the summer. So she isn't quite on the no-fly list yet, but she is getting close to that deadline, and flight is going to be uncomfortable for her. And I think her and Harry obviously have been in the news quite a lot over the last few months anyway. So I think the controversy around them generally is going to cause some interesting headlines in the press over the next few weeks.
Yeah, no doubt. Fox and Friends, never far from the controversy, have been quick to blame Harry and Meghan for Prince Philip's death. Reported in the Daily Beast yesterday was the Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade linking the death of Prince Philip to Harry and Meghan's incendiary interview with Oprah Winfrey a few weeks back. On Friday's show, he said there were reports that Philip was so enraged with the interview and the fallout. So here he's trying to recover from a major illness, and he's hit with that added stress. Fox obviously have a little bit of a habit of this. On another show later in the day, Miranda Devine said it just made no sense for the couple to give that interview with the Prince Philip so ill, and it seems that they're linking to the death unduly. Obviously, the Buckingham Palace was quick to state that Prince Philip passed away peacefully in his sleep, and there's no reason why we shouldn't believe that.
Thank you for that, Joe. In a time of such hateful rhetoric, it's worth remembering that, you know, we have to ignore the noise and focus on, you know, the death of the man himself, of Prince Philip. Focus on the loss and bring his message. Thank you for listening.